10-minute rule motion, George Eustice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. One of the things that all of us need to learn when we are first elected to this House is that it can be surprisingly difficult to get things done. If you are a minister who remains in one place for long enough, slowly but surely you get important issues over the line, but not everything. And for me, from my time in DEFRA, modernising our rules around hare preservation, and in particular a closed season on the shooting of hares, remains unfinished business. Hares are an iconic and much loved species, famed for their boxing behaviour in March. However, their population has fallen to an estimated 800,000 today, from what was thought to be around 4 million in the mid to late 19th century. Our hare population is under increasing pressure, including from disease, including the rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus, which was identified in hares in January this year, and also from illegal hare coursing. And I would like to take this opportunity to commend the work that the police are doing to tackle the illegal gangs that are responsible for hare coursing. Yesterday I spoke to Phil Vickers, who is the national lead on these issues. We are now seeing far greater police cooperation and coordination nationally. Police forces in Lincolnshire, Cambridgeshire, Humberside and North Yorkshire are working together and sharing intelligence. The police estimate that there are around 150 hardened individuals who are responsible for the majority of these illegal hare coursing events. Last year in Lincolnshire alone, Lincolnshire police prosecuted 47 individuals, so progress is being made. The police would welcome some changes to the law, including making it easier for them to seize dogs and to recover the cost of kennelling dogs. But that will be a matter for a different piece of legislation on a different day, because the bill that I propose today addresses the issue of the shooting of hares. The government estimates that around 300,000 hares are shot each year, mostly during the months of February and March. I have to say that the figure sounds quite high. So when I first heard it, I had some scepticism. And I took the liberty of talking to a gamekeeper from the Babworth estate, Jonathan Davis, to talk through how we could get to such a high figure. The figures are broadly as follows. There are 3,900 registered shooting estates in the UK. It's estimated that around 80% of these do not shoot hares, mainly because increasingly the shooting community recognise the plight of our hares and want to play their part to protect them. However, around 20% of shooting estates, that's 780, still run organised hare shoots. They typically run across 3 days, and the average take per day is around 100 hares per day. If you add to that some of the more informal hare shoots that take place on farms, especially in Lincolnshire and in East Yorkshire, you start to very quickly realise that an assessment of 300,000 hares killed per year is indeed realistic. And if you set that against the estimated population of just 800,000 hares nationally, that is an issue of great concern. A key tenet of all game and wildlife conservation is that we should protect species during their breeding season. That is why we have statutory closed seasons on everything from ducks and pheasants through to deer, woodcock and geese. There are also animal welfare issues in targeting species during their breeding season. A baby hare, a leveret, will be dependent on its mother for typically 4 weeks after it is born. And if its mother is killed, the baby hare, the leveret, will perish, and that is an issue of welfare concern. As long ago as 1892, our Victorian forebears recognised the need to protect hares during their breeding season. The 1892 Hares Preservation Act introduced what was called a closed time during the breeding season, and it delivered this closed time in those days through implementing a ban on the sale of hares or hare meat during the months of March to July inclusive. This 127-year-old law remains in force today, but it predates the advent of refrigeration and freezer technology. It was also introduced in an era when hares were hunted predominantly for food, not shot as now for sport. As a result, the 1892 Act is hopelessly out of date. It is no longer effective. It is indeed no longer even enforced. It also leaves in place a peculiar anomaly and legal uncertainty in some areas, that a game pie sold from the freezer by a pub cannot be sold during the months of March to July inclusive, even though the hare may have been killed during the winter months. So my bill would replace the 1892 Act with its ban on sale with a modern-day closed season, prohibiting the killing or taking of hares during the breeding season. Northern Ireland and Scotland already have such legislation in place. Indeed, virtually every other European country that has a brown hare population protects its hares. We in England and Wales are unique so far in failing to do so, and this is an oversight that must be addressed. In Scotland, the close season runs from the beginning of February, and I'm open to discussion about precisely when the close season should be for England and Wales. My starting point is that at the very least, it must at least replicate the provisions of the 1892 Act and must cover the months, therefore, from the beginning of March to the end of July. But there is a very strong case to have protection at least from the beginning of February, possibly even earlier, since we do know that hares are capable of breeding during the month of February. And in practice, the shooting estates that still run hare shoots don't really shoot hares during the winter months because they are targeting game birds, and there are safety concerns in shooting hares in a shoot if they are targeting, say, pheasants. What they actually do is when the close season for game birds begins, at the end of January, the beginning of February, they have another month or 2 months where they run hare shoots, and that gives them a commercial income during the months of February and March. I should say that I'm also open to making provision for there to be licensed culling in certain circumstances to protect severe damage to crops, or for there to be some kind of limited farmers' defence, as is provided for in other legislation such as the Deer Act. Mr. Speaker, occasionally this House passes small but important legislation, and over time that legislation can get forgotten or even neglected. Despite multiple better regulation initiatives by governments of all colours over the decades, ministers and Whitehall have collectively decided repeatedly that now is not the time to take action. This House has, in one way, one hand chosen not to repeal this legislation because they recognise that its intent and its purposes are as valid today or more valid today than ever before. And yet this House and successive governments have failed to take the action necessary to make this legislation effective in a modern era. And I want to persuade the House finally that now is the time to put this right and to introduce a modern close season to safeguard our hares. And that is because in January of this year, DEFRA identified the RHDV2 virus, which has devastated our rabbit population in hares for the first time. And estates right across East Anglia are reporting a worrying concern with the instant die-off of hares, many hare carcasses being found. It is clear that the RHDV2 virus is having a devastating effect. And as our hare population, what's left of it, faces this threat, it is essential that we act now to reduce the mortality of our hare population and to afford our hares the protection that they deserve.
Yeah. Order. The question is that the Honourable Member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are that have been in say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Neil Parish, Jim Fitzpatrick, Norman Lamb, Sir Roger Gale, Henry Smith, Teresa Villas, Helen Goodman, Simon Hoare, Sir Greg Knight, James Cartledge, Jeremy Lefroy, and myself, sir.
George Eustice.
Hare's Preservation Bill.
Second reading what day?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Thank you. Order. For the avoidance of doubt, I should make clear that under the order of the House of yesterday, the debate on the two opposition day motions can last up to 6 hours. In other words, the second of those debates must finish by shortly before 7 p.m. My guesstimate would be that it would be 6:58, not at 7 p.m. as stated in error on the printed copies of today's order paper. A correction has been issued and the online order paper is correct. Order, we now come to the first opposition day motion on prisons and probation to move